Hello, class. I hope that you're doing well and staying safe during this wild and unprecedented school year. For today's topic, we're going to be covering Chapter 5, Vocational Theory and Research in Counseling Psych. Before we begin, I'll do some announcements, and again, I'll split this up into a few different parts so that you don't have to listen to just one long video. Please email me if you have any questions. I'm available to meet via email, via phone, via Zoom. So just let me know. And here we go. So for some announcements, the paper 1 is due Monday, March 30th. So please be sure to get that in. If you have issues regarding turning it in on Blackboard or something like that, please email me. Pretty soon, we're going to be doing role plays. So I will be emailing out some instructions, including like who you're paired with for your role play. And we will be discussing this in the check-in meeting on Monday as well. So if you have any questions, you can ask then as well. Just a reminder that after today, there's just a few reading responses left. There's only four or so chapters left. So please be doing your reading responses. Today, what we're covering is Chapter 5, Vocational Theory and Research. Now, this will be on Exam 3, not Exam 2, just so you know. But this will tie into the next lesson that we're covering, which is career counseling. All right, so this chapter has to do with vocational theory and research. Now, just to note what we mean by vocational theory, this is often regarding the models, the research related to work. So vocations refer to work, occupations, jobs, callings, sort of like a career. So vocational psych will really focus on these research models. And then when we transition to the next chapter, we're covering career counseling. We're going to focus on how to apply these models to working individually. So this first chapter is more about the research, and then when we get to chapter 15, that'll be more about the applications. So when we think about work and we think about psychologists, there's lots of different types of psychologists who are involved in the world of work. Now, vocational psychologists, sometimes more broadly counseling psychologists, is a field of psychology that focuses on the role of work in people's lives across the lifespan. So at the beginning of someone's work life, they're entering the job fields, they're trying to get jobs, they're starting their first jobs, learning skills, and so on. Towards the end of the lifespan, they might be focusing on retirement and what retirement means, that they're no longer going to be working and so on. Another example might be focusing on employees' work satisfaction. So how satisfied are they in their work, in their lives? How are they adjusting to a job, a new role? So this is how vocational and counseling psychologists would look at the role of work. They're mostly focused on the individual. You may have heard of industrial organizational psychologists or IO psychologists. These also focus on work in a way, but they're focusing more on the needs of the organization, the needs of the business. So how do we increase worker productivity? How do we make our selection criteria better when we're trying to get new employees? So they're focusing, again, less on the individual workers, but more on the larger business. So how do counselors get involved in the work world? There's a variety of ways. Sometimes they may do assessment. Assessment can be one-on-one individually, so they will look at someone's interests and assess their interests. They might assess their strengths, their skills. So that could be a one-on-one. Sometimes they do the employee selection. So they'll work with screening and coaching um, employees to fit certain jobs or make sure that the employee coming in is a good fit. So they work in the world of assessment. They can work in employee assistance programs. So this is called an EAP. And a lot of big companies will have these programs so that if their clients, I mean, if their employees are struggling in some way, they can have them see a mental health counselor. So originally, this was just for substance abuse. So if someone was coming to work and had a substance use issue, they could use the employee assistance program. But now there's a range of concerns that someone can use an EAP for. And employers like this because this keeps their employees functioning better to have this program in place. It also has a lower cost. So if they lose employees because of substance use or mental health concerns, like they have to quit or whatever, um, it's quite costly to replace them. Hiring new people, etc. Also, if it keeps them coming to work, there's less absenteeism. So, overall, employees and employers benefit from having these programs, and counseling psychologists can get involved there. Counseling psychologists have also developed stress reduction programs, prevention programs in the workplace. So, um, how to keep your employees with as little stress as possible. So, they'll maybe um, make a mindfulness program or some sort of stress relief program in the workplace. And they can do consulting, so mental health consultation. So if an employee is having some behavioral problems, if there's a school issue, an organizational issue, counseling psychologists can act as a consultant to help the, the employer figure out what to do in this situation. Some of these assessments that I mentioned are now being done online. Um, so there's a variety of different online assessment tools, and many will use John Holland's code, which we'll talk more about later. But the self directed search is one, strong interest inventory is another, the ACT profile. I'm going to post a link where you can go on to a website and take one of these sort of interest inventories. Um, so there's a lot happening online as well. So I want you to reflect on your own career and work activity. What are your goals in what you'd want to do regarding work? What does this look like? Do you want to work in a small company, a large company? Do you want to work at from home as you're sort of doing now, or be able to be in the company of others? What sort of field do you imagine yourself working in? Another thing I want you to think about is how this has changed across time. So, what did you want to do for work when you were 5? What about when you were 12? And what about now? How have your ideas about work changed across your lifespan already? And then what would you want to be doing for work in 5 years? So, with this reflection activity, just think about what is it that interests you about these fields, about these careers, about these jobs. Um, is it the financial security? Is it the thing that you're doing? Is it the people that you'd be working with? So, what is it about these that really draw you to work? And this will sort of be a preview to some of the ways that psychologists think about work and the person, and how work and the person can fit and maybe not fit. So, we're going to be covering three different paradigms in vocational psychology. These paradigms are ways that psychologists look at how people make sense of their work, how they make sense of the choices that they're making to get to the careers that they want or the jobs that they're doing. And so we'll go over these different paradigms one by one. So we're going to look at these three paradigms in vocational psych. These paradigms look at how people are both affected by their work and make sense of their work, including their work decisions and other parts of their work life. So the first type of model is a person environment fit model. So it's sometimes called person environment reciprocity models and the role of the personality. And basically, these were the first models that came out when we were thinking about psychology and work. These are trait models that pretty much say that a person is with their personality chooses their work environment to have a good match. And the environment then impacts the person as well. So we call this the bi-directional influence. The person is impacting their environment because of their personality and who they are, and the environment is impacting them. So, for example, if someone's very extroverted by in their personality, they might choose types of jobs where they have to interact with a lot of people. So, let's say a teacher, and then their job, they're interacting with all those people, all the children, other teachers. This brings out more of their extroversion, their extroverted personality. So the environment is impacting them and they're impacting their environment. They're choosing to go to that environment because it matches. For someone who's introverted, they might choose a job that is more solitary. So let's say um, in IT or something like that. So um, they might be more pulled to that job. And then once they get in that job, their introversion is sort of rewarded by the job because they're just working on problems by themselves or something like this. So these were the early models of work in psychology. And sometimes these have been critiqued for being somewhat simplistic. Um, Initially, they didn't have this reciprocity piece. It was just the person is choosing the environment, and then it didn't really say much about the environment. So now we've added this reciprocity piece that these environments are dynamic and they impact each other. And a good fit now may not be a good fit later because we change and the environments change. So, an example of this is my mom was working in an after school program and she was really loving it. Had a really good time. She liked working with the kids. However, her boss changed partway through, and then she really didn't like it. This boss was a micromanager and difficult in a variety of ways. So now her job didn't feel like a good fit anymore. So it's more dynamic and more complex than just picking the job based on what the job tasks are. Another way that you can think about this theory is just, again, think about how you impact your job and the job impacts you. So you go to a job and this work environment there changes how you act. Let's say this job is particularly social. So you gain new social skills at this job. So then it impacts you and impacts your skill set. And then if you were to go to another job, you bring that skill set with you. So all this is to say is that the environment of your work changes the people inside them, inside that environment. And the people change the environment too. So it's just a bi-directional process between the person and the environment. The next paradigm to discuss in vocational psych is constructivism. And this looks at how people subjectively experience their self and the environment. And so this means it's not the environment itself or the person's personality itself that is determining a fit or determining if someone's satisfied with their job. Rather, it is how that person experiences it and construes meaning from that experience. So, um, what is that person thinking about their job? How are they um, believing and changing their thoughts about themselves and about the environment because of the job? So, it's really trying to look more internally at the person rather than externally as the job has these qualifications and so on. So, from this model, behavior is best understood in context. We have to know how the person is interacting with the object and making sense of the object. And in this case, the object is their work life. And it really, again, places emphasis on the subjective frame of reference. This means that that person's subjective experience is the most important. Everything in the external world is interpreted through the lens of that subjective, personal, private world. So that's constructivism in general. And then if we apply it to career theory, there's a career construction theory by a researcher named Savickas. And this theory looks at, again, subjectivity and meaning of various work experiences rather than just the objective, quote unquote, answers. So we will look at the narrative that this person is sharing about their lives. As you think back upon your work life in the past, and you think about jobs that you didn't like, what is the story that you're telling yourself about that job that you didn't like? When I think back about one of my jobs, for example, one of the jobs I didn't like was working in a chemistry lab because I found it really isolating. And so the meaning and narrative that I'm telling myself about that job is that, I'm an extrovert and I need to work with people. And that job was too isolating. The most recent paradigm in counseling psychology and vocational psychology is the social cognitive revolution. So it's putting a lot more focus on social learning theory and self efficacy. So, one example of this is Lent et al.'s model of career development, of how people choose their career path and move along their career. And they look at three components about how people make choices about which careers to go into and which careers to pursue. And they're looking at these three main components. The first is self efficacy. So, what are people thinking when they think, can I do this? So, as they're thinking about various career options, let's say at first they're interested in being a doctor. They might think to themselves, can I do this? Do I have the skills to go to med school and be a doctor? The next is people go through this process of thinking about their expectations. So if I do this, if I want to be a doctor, what will the result or outcomes of this decision be? Well, I'd be in school for many, many years, probably be in a lot of debt, but there's a good, um, salary at the outcome. So they're going to be thinking through these different expectations. They might be thinking, well, especially in this time, being a care professional, put yourself um, at risk. So they're going to be thinking through all these different expectations of what this career choice means. And the third component for this social cognitive revolution is thinking about personal goals. So people all the time are evaluating, what is it that I actually want? Can I, what fits with my values? What fits with my goals and my dreams? So this moves beyond just interests and abilities, which was often the focus in that first paradigm, the person environment fit. And it moves into this idea of how you're thinking about yourself and how you're thinking about your job and how you're thinking about others. This happened around, sort of grew out of CBT as well. Because if you think about CBT and cognitions, it's paying a lot of attention to your cognitions. And the research on the social cognitive model and lens model of career development shows that people's self efficacy is linked to performance. So if they believe they can do this, then they do better at it. Again, this is sort of common sense, but before this model, we really didn't pay much attention to people's self efficacy. However, inflated self efficacy, if they really think they can do this and they don't have the skills, they actually can't, that can also be problematic. A good example of this research is that um, for the STEM fields, for those of for those people who feel like, yes, I can do chemistry, I can do math, I'm good at this, um, they're more likely to be interested in STEM fields. So self efficacy and these outcome expectations actually impact interests. It's not just are you interested in it, it matters how you think about yourself and your own abilities. So this model is quite complex, and you don't have to know all these specific routes and everything in this model. But the idea here is that how people develop their career interests over time, there's a lot of factors that go into this. Again, self-efficacy, how they're thinking about if they have the skills, the abilities to do it, their outcome expectations. If it's not going to have the desired outcome, they might not actually pursue that path. Their own interests. This then changes their behavior, their intentions for doing the activity, for, let's say, taking those classes or doing those internships. And then they start narrowing in on those activity selections and practices and then moving towards their goal. So this is the basics of this paradigm, is that there's a lot that goes into how people make their career and work decisions. This will end part one of the lecture. Um, Stay around for part two.